Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's program, Backyard Tales, with our guest host, Jessica Castle of Nevada Department of Wildlife. Jessica will tell us all about the critters that live right in your backyard. My name is Amanda, and I'm a librarian at the Incline Village Library. All right, Jessica, I'll turn it over to you and you can take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Amanda. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight, where we are going to be talking all about backyard wildlife. So those critters that can be found right in our own neighborhoods. Yes, my name is Jessica Castle, and I'm a wildlife educator with the Department of Wildlife. I am joined this evening by Jess Wolf, who is going to be helping me out to answer any questions that come in through the chat. And I will also be asking you all questions throughout the program as well. So we really wanted this to be very interactive. So I'll be asking you questions throughout the program. And the best way to answer those is to go ahead and put them in the chat. So at the very bottom of your screen, you should be able to see the chat box. So if you want to answer any of those questions, go ahead and put them in there. Additionally, if you're watching from Facebook Live, you can go ahead and put those in the comment box. And we have somebody helping us out to put those over into Zoom as well. So go ahead and answer in the Facebook Live as well. So our very first chat question is, have you ever seen an animal near your home or in your backyard? So if you happen to know what kind of animal it was, you can tell me what kind of animal it was and what it was doing. So what did you see that animal doing? Was it eating? Was it playing? Was it digging up your lawn? What sort of things was that animal doing?
So
go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead,
I see a two. You've seen two animals in your backyard? Do you want to explain what animals those were? I know I've seen a great horned owl hanging out in my big incense cedar.
Oh, very nice. Don't think I've ever seen a great horned owl in the wild. That is pretty awesome.
Yeah, it was getting harassed by the jays.
I bet.
We have someone who said that they have two squirrels digging.
Yeah, I bet they can definitely be digging up the lawn. So it could be a good interaction that you had with an animal in your backyard, or even possibly a bad interaction. Just kind of depends on what they were up to. Any other responses, Jess?
Yeah, we have someone who had a Canada goose land on their balcony once.
Oh, very cool. They will actually nest in some very interesting places. We have often gotten calls that they've nested on somebody's roof or right next to their pool or things like that. That's funny. Yeah, definitely have Canada geese in the area as well. Well, those are all awesome responses. So why exactly is it that we get wildlife in our backyard? You know, they're called wild animals. They should be out in the wilderness, right? Well, as it turns out, our backyards provide really excellent habitat for animals. So what exactly is a habitat? Well, a habitat is just the natural place or environment where plants and animals live. So it's basically a home for animals. And a habitat has 4 very special things that it needs in order to be considered a habitat. So the 4 different components of habitat is, the first one is food. So every animal needs something to eat. Animals sometimes have very specific things that they eat, or sometimes they are generalists, so they'll eat whatever they can find. But every habitat needs some source of food for an animal. It also needs water. So while there are many animals like our desert tortoise that can go a whole year without drinking water, at some point, every habitat still needs water in some form or another. And animals are very smart and can take advantage of different kinds of water, as we'll look at shortly. Animals also need shelter. So when the weather is really bad, they need somewhere to hide. They need somewhere safe when they're raising their young, and they need places that they can escape from predators. So every animal needs somewhere safe to hide. And lastly, all animals need space. So if you think about taking a mountain lion and putting it in a little tiny box, it would not be very happy in that little tiny box, and it would probably not survive, because animals need enough space so that they can stay healthy, they can find their food, water, and shelter, they can find a mate, they can get enough exercise. So this one is really important. So these are the 4 things that all habitats need to have, is food, water, shelter, and space. And as it turns out, all of these can basically be found right in our own backyards. And sometimes we don't even realize it. So take a look at this photo and go ahead and put it in the chat or put it in the Facebook live stream if you see any sources of habitat that a wild animal might take advantage of or might use. So look really closely and let me know in the chat if you see any sources of habitat. And it can be any one of those 4 things that we talked about.
We have the doghouse might act as shelter for some critters.
Definitely, yeah. Somebody might sneak inside of there that was not Fido like intended.
We've got the water down at the bottom of the yard and the bird seed.
Awesome. Yeah, exactly. So a pond is a great source of water for a lot of different animals. So, you know, birds will come in there and play in the water and get a drink. You'll get all kinds of small mammals that need to take advantage of that water, but lots of animals, basically anything will come and get a drink out of that water because living in the desert, water is pretty scarce. So it's one of the things that animals are always on the lookout for. There is one that I don't think anybody caught, but maybe it was in the chat, is down in front of the doghouse. It was excellent that somebody brought up that the doghouse was a source of shelter. I didn't even actually think of that. I was more thinking about the dog food, is that although we might not think about it, wild animals will absolutely come eat our pet food as well. So if you feed your pets outside or have dog or cat food out there, you might be attracting some wild animals that would come in and get a free snack. Another one is absolutely that bird seed. So that bird seed is going to attract a lot of animals, not just birds. So other things like bears would eat bird seed, even coyotes. But of course, that bird seed is going to attract birds. And with birds, you're going to attract larger predators as well. And lastly, that water. That is another great source of habitat in this backyard that is really important for a lot of animals. But basically, this whole yard is just a huge habitat for animals. The grass, things like rabbits might eat it and then attract other larger predators. Many animals would hide in those bushes, use them as shelter, and same thing with that tree. We could get, like that great horned owl you saw, Jess, would maybe be hanging out in that big old tree. So our backyards provide perfect habitat for a lot of animals. So that's why they sometimes come into our neighborhoods, even though we wouldn't expect them to be there. So tonight we are going to be talking about some of these animals that you would maybe find in your backyard, and we are going to be talking about their adaptations. So adaptations are something special about an animal that they use to survive in their habitat. So these are either body parts or behaviors. So it's something that an animal has on its body, or it's something that that animal does that helps it to survive in its habitat. So earlier when I mentioned that desert tortoise that can go a long, long time without drinking water because they live in the desert where water is very scarce, that's one of their adaptations. So adaptations, you can basically think of like an animal's superpowers. It's things that are very special about them that help them to survive. Some examples of these are like camouflage. So that's going to be something special on an animal's body that's going to help them hide and help them hide from predators. You can think about the talons on birds of prey. They need those talons to be able to capture their food. And like the gills on a fish, how are they able to breathe underwater? Because they have those special adaptations, those gills that help them breathe underwater. And tonight we're also going to be talking about evidence of wildlife, because we often get animals in our backyard, but we don't always get to see them. Maybe because we have pets that scared them away before we got to see them, or they might be nocturnal, meaning that they come out at night. So we didn't get to see them. So we will also be talking about evidence of wildlife. And evidence of wildlife is just ways that we know animals were there, even though we don't get to actually see them. And it's because we know they were there because they leave something behind that tells us that they were there. So a good example is like scat. So scat is what scientists call animal poop. So we can often tell what animal was there based on their scat, or sometimes their nests. So birds will often leave behind nests, or of course tracks is a really good one. And you can try to identify the tracks, and that tells you what animal you might have had in your yard. So let's get into some of the critters that are considered backyard wildlife. And backyard wildlife are just these animals that are super well adapted to being around humans. So that means that they are more willing to be around humans than a lot of other animals. And they have really learned how to use our backyards and our neighborhoods to their benefit. So that's what I mean when I say they're really well adapted to living in urban environments or living in cities. So our first one is going to be the raccoon. So raccoons are omnivores. So that means that they eat both meat and plant material. And this is one of the things that has allowed them to be super adaptable to cities, is that they can eat basically anything that they come across. So they are not super picky. They do tend to stick to areas that have more water. So if you live near a lake or you have a stream running through your backyard or something like that, you are pretty likely to have raccoons in the area because they do tend to stick to areas with water. So because of that, they are going to be eating a lot of things that are in the water. So they love crawdads is one of the main things they like to eat, or mussels. Fish if they can catch them, but they're not super great hunters, but they'll eat insects. And one of the things that brings them into urban environments and sometimes causes problems is that they'll even eat human sources of food. So they will get in to our trash cans and eat basically anything that we've left behind. So that has allowed them to really be able to expand where they can live and come into human areas. Some of their really amazing adaptations that they have is one is their super sensitive hands. So you can see in that top photo, they've got hands that look a lot like humans. So they've got those 5 fingers, they have thumbs just like humans do. So they have very strong and nimble hands. And people have often said that it looks like raccoons are washing their food, because if you've ever seen them eat, they will actually dip their hands in the water and then rub the water on the outside of their food. And it's not that they're actually washing their food, but it's actually that they have these really sensitive hands, that water makes their hands even more sensitive. And that sensitivity helps them figure out what part of what they're holding is edible. So for example, if they were holding some sort of fruit like a peach, they can feel what part of it is soft and edible, and then what part is the pit that they're not going to be able to eat. So because of this, because of people saying that it looked like they were washing their food, their scientific name is kind of funny, and it is Procyon loader, which translates to dog-like washer. That's what their scientific name means, is that they kind of look like dogs and it looks like they're washing their food, is how they got that name. But it's really just so that they can tell what part of what they're holding is edible. They also are really excellent climbers. So in addition to those front hands that can grip stuff really well, they also have some pretty impressive back feet that turn all the way around. So they can turn a complete 180 degrees. So if you try to do that with your foot definitely cannot turn 180 degrees around. But theirs can, and then they've got those big old claws that helps them grip onto trees. So when they are climbing down a tree, they can actually go head first, like you see in that photo, which is pretty rare for a lot of animals. Things like squirrels can do it, but most animals, if they were to go up, they have to come back down. And of course, they have that characteristic little black mask. And that black mask is to help them at night, because raccoons are nocturnal. And so they have that black mask to help reduce glare so that it's not super bright. So that black mask is helping to reduce the glare at night and improve their night vision. So if you think about anytime you've ever seen football players with those big black stripes underneath their eyes, it's the same sort of thing. They are putting that black stripes underneath their eyes so that they can see better during the game and not have a bunch of glare. So if you are looking for evidence of raccoons, one thing that you can do is, if you think you have raccoons in your yard, is you can set up trail cameras. So I will be including some photos of trail cameras throughout tonight's program. So this is a raccoon that was clearly on to us and saw the camera in this particular photo, but you can see that they are hunting in the water. That's really where they like to hang out a lot. And then on the right is a picture of what their tracks look like. So if you are trying to learn tracks and learn ways to identify them, one of the things you're going to learn is how many toes they have. So some things like deer we'll see only have 2, versus coyotes and cats that have 4, but when you're looking for raccoons, they have 5 fingers that you would see. So you see all 5 of those, and you'll often see their claws in the dirt as well. So these are what raccoon tracks look like. So if you have anywhere that's soft and muddy and you think you might have a raccoon in your yard, you can keep an eye out for these tracks. All right, so we are going to do another chat activity. So I want everyone to look super closely at this photo and count how many raccoons you see.
I see a guess of 3. Someone said 4. Any other guesses?
3 and 4, all right. All right, well, those are the 2 most popular guesses. So of course we have 1 raccoon here, raccoon number 2 here, raccoon number 3 here, and there is in fact a 4th little raccoon right up here. You can see his striped tail poking out right here and is just stepping out of the screen. So raccoons are super social. So if you have 1, it's pretty likely that you have more than 1 in the area because they are pretty social and they do tend to travel in groups or families. Our next critter we are going to talk about tonight is the striped skunk. So skunks are omnivores. So much like a raccoon, they're going to be eating both plants and meat, but they are going to be eating more insects than a raccoon would. So they have pretty big claws, so they'll rip into dead and decaying logs and eat a bunch of the insects that are out of there. They'll also eat carrion, which is animals that have already died, because again, they're not very good hunters. So if they found something that's already there, then they'll eat those animals that they come across, but they're not super great hunters. But again, because they're omnivores, that allows them to come into neighborhoods and take advantage of lots of different kinds of foods that we have in our backyard. So when we were looking at that photo of that yard, the one with the pet food, these guys would totally be coming in and eating the pet food. Cat or dog food, doesn't matter. They would come in and eat that. Some of the adaptations that striped skunks has is, of course, those big white stripes. So that's how they get their name. We actually have 2 different species of skunks in Nevada. So these are the ones that are more common that you would find in urban places. But we also have spotted skunks, which of course, based on their name, have little spots on them and are quite a bit smaller and tend to live more in the desert versus these ones that, again, like to stick near water. So they can get quite a bit bigger because there tends to be more food near water. And scientists are not entirely sure, but they think that those big white stripes are actually as a warning system because they have that defensive spray. And so scientists believe that those stripes are telling other animals, hey, I can be dangerous, you should just stay away and leave me alone. Because otherwise they're pretty small and they would make a good meal for something like a coyote. But they have those bright white stripes trying to warn other animals to back off. And despite being very smelly themselves, they actually have an excellent sense of smell. And that is probably their best sense of how they are getting around at night. So they have pretty mediocre, very okay night vision. So it's nothing super spectacular, but mostly they're using that big nose to be able to sniff out sources of food and smell for predators. So they need to know if they need to go somewhere safe. And people are often worried about getting sprayed by skunks. It smells very bad. It can actually burn if it gets in your eyes. So that is the whole point of it, is to defend them from predators. It's basically like their own personal pepper spray. So when they spray it towards a predator, it makes it so that animal can't see very well and it can't smell. And that allows the skunk to be able to get away. So while that predator is incapacitated by not being able to see and smell, that's when the skunk can get away. But because of that, that means that they really don't want to waste this spray. It's basically their only line of defense. They're not very big, they're not very aggressive, they're not very fast. So this spray is really the only thing that they have to defend themselves against predators. So they really don't want to waste it on things that they don't have to. So they don't really want to spray humans because we're not a real threat to them. We just accidentally got too close or perhaps let our dog get too close to them. So if you were to ever see a skunk and you had it cornered on accident and it's kind of doing this like stomping motion, that is them warning you that you are too close and they're about to spray. So if you don't listen to their little stomping and they'll kind of make like some gruff noises, then you might get sprayed. And it can spray up to 15 feet. So they can shoot it pretty far. But one of the only animals that is a main predator of skunks is going to be the great horned owl. And that is because, like I said, this spray mostly affects the eyes and the nose, so the eyes and the sense of smell of predators. And great horned owls have something called a nictating membrane, which is a third clear eyelid that comes over their eyes. And so it's like their own set of goggles protecting their eyes. And owls, like many birds, don't really have a very strong sense of smell. So they're not really affected by the smell, and it doesn't burn their eyes like other animals. So owls are going to be one of the main predators of skunks. So here is a couple of skunk tracks. So they are very cute and very tiny. So you can see a bunch of the little pads of the feet. Again, they're going to have those 5 toes that you're going to be looking for. And you can see those claw marks as well. So right here on the very edge, those are the claw marks, because skunks are going to have those really big claws for ripping into logs and digging up roots and digging into the ground and stuff. So they have those really big claws that you can often see. All right, so for our next chat activity is I want you to look really closely at this photo and see if you can find the skunk, and then put in the chat which quadrant you think the skunk is in. So if you think the skunk is in the top left, that'll be A. If you think the skunk is in the top right, that's B. The bottom left is C, and the bottom right is D.
It's definitely a very tricky one to spot, but I see some people saying that they see it in quadrant C.
Yeah?
And is that a trick question as well as a C?
Is that a trick question? It's not a trick question. I promise there's a skunk in there. So those who said it in C, good job. It is, in fact, in C. So it is right here. So it's the black body, and then here is the long white stripe. It's funny because you wouldn't think that skunks have super great camouflage, but here they just look like a little shadow, and then their white stripe looks like one of those branches. So it's just climbing through those logs right there. So good job for everyone who found it. It's a tough one for sure. Our next animal we are going to discuss tonight is mule deer. So mule deer are the only kind of deer that you can find in Nevada. There are other species in neighboring states like white-tailed deer, but the mule deer are the only ones that we have here. And they are strictly herbivores, so meaning that they're eating only plant material. So eating things like grasses, leaves, shrubs. They'll even eat the leaves on like sagebrush or bitterbrush during the winter when there's not much around. And they can be found all throughout Nevada. So we have them all over the place in lots of different types of habitats. So we can find them, in the desert, in the sagebrush scrub. We can find them up near Tahoe. And definitely they will take advantage of those urban neighborhoods as well. So some of their adaptations is, again, they have really excellent hearing. So that is one of their main senses that they're using. So you can see that they have those really large ears. So they've got big ears. Their ears are cupped as well. So this is something that you can try out. You can make your hands into a cup and then put them around your ears. And as I talk, you'll hear that it's a little bit louder and a little bit clearer. So that's how cupped ears are able to gather more sound and make it a little bit more clear as well. In addition to having those cupped ears, they're also super maneuverable. So they can twist them all over the place to better hear what direction sounds are coming from. And because they have those such big ears, that's actually how they got their name of mule deer, is that they were originally said that they looked like mule's ears. So that's how they got their name of mule deer. The males are going to have big old antlers, so those big antlers on top of their head, and only the males have those, not the females. And that is for competition among the other males. They'll use them to spar or fight with other males in the fall when they are trying to gain the affection of the females. And lots of people don't know that antlers fall off every single year, and deer have to grow a whole new set of them once a year. So after the males go through the fall and they have successfully won their female, those antlers will fall off and right at the base of the head, and then they have to grow a whole new set. So they'll be growing a new set. They should be finishing up about now. But when they're regrowing, they're covered in some fuzzy stuff we call it velvet. And when they're regrowing like that, it's actually live tissue. So they are being fed with a blood supply. It takes a lot of energy for the deer to be able to grow those. But then after they are full grown, they need to get that fuzz, that velvet off of there. So they'll start rubbing their antlers on trees or rocks or things like that to be able to rub off that velvet until it's just the normal hardened version of antlers that we're used to seeing. And right about now is a good time to see fawns as well. So fawns are the baby deer. And when fawns are born, they can walk almost immediately. Usually within about 30 minutes of birth, they are up and walking. But even though they can walk, they are still not quite able to keep up with mom. And so she will often stash the baby in the bushes for quite some time, sometimes for hours on end, and leave the baby hidden while she goes out and forages. So right now, if you were to go out hiking and you were to come across a baby fawn on its own, there's nothing to be concerned about. That is completely natural because again, those moms will stash their babies because when they're that little, they are covered in those spots, which are to act as a form of camouflage. So if you think about sun streaming through the trees and how there's little spots of light on the ground when that happens, that's exactly what the spots on the fawn are supposed to represent, are those same little spots of light coming through the trees. So they're camouflaged and they're born without a scent. So they will just lie super still in the bushes, scentless and camouflaged. So they are basically invisible from predators during this time. So if you were to find a fawn on its own, do not be alarmed. Mom is probably nearby. It is best to just leave them be. So here is a big ol' buck that is taking advantage of a yard. So you can see those big antlers on him. So those are just on the males. And mule deer will absolutely come into neighborhoods. In fact, they love them. So not only do we have lush landscaping, so we have lots of grass that they can eat, they love to get into like vegetable gardens. I've heard of them at vineyards eating people's grapes. They'll eat any sort of plant material that you have in your garden. So they'll definitely come into neighborhoods. And they like the shade and the water that we have as well. And then they'll leave behind their big calling card, their piles of scat, which are little pebbles like this, a little bit smaller. And their tracks are just going to be those two little hoof marks that they leave behind in the mud. So no big paw print like we saw with the raccoon. Coyotes are another animal that will take advantage of human sources of food and neighborhoods. So they are omnivores and they definitely prefer rodents. So that's their main source of food is going to be things like voles or mice or rabbits. That's going to be their main source of food, but they will still eat other things as well. So they'll get into fruits and vegetables. So they'll eat out of gardens and they will also get into humans' garbages and eat any sources of food that we might have left behind. And coyotes are extremely smart. So they are very, very smart and they're very flexible in where they are able to live. They can live in basically any habitat in Nevada. So we have them up in the mountains in the driest of deserts near Las Vegas to our sagebrush scrub up here and right in our own backyards. And they're really excellent climbers and jumpers. So they are able to get over fences and come into yards and get onto golf courses and things like that because they're so smart and really good climbers. And they're pretty social as well. So like we talked about with the raccoons, they tend to hang out in family groups. So do coyotes. And they will often have a small family group or a pack that has an alpha male and female. And then the betas will help raise the pups from that year. And so everybody is kind of helping out to raise the pups. But then in the fall, when the pups have been raised, they often get kicked out and have to go find their own territories, but they are very social. So can you identify which of these is going to be the coyote track? So go ahead and put it into the chat if you think you can guess which one of these is the coyote track.
I see someone guessed A or C.
A or C, nice.
We've got a vote for C.
All right, so we're a little bit split, but mostly C. Good job, everyone. So A is actually a mountain lion track. So one of the ways to tell is they have super, super rounded toes, and mountain lions have retractable claws. So if you've ever played with just like a house cat, you know that their claws can go inside their paws when they're not being used. So they have those retractable claws. So you're never going to see claw marks when it's a cat. So yes, this one is a mountain lion. This one is the raccoon. So we've got those 5 fingers again. You can kind of see their claws right here. So C is the coyote, yes. So you can kind of see a claw mark right here, but it's a little bit smaller because coyotes really aren't very big. They're really only about 30 pounds. So they're like a medium-sized dog. They're not super large. And we have lots of birds that would love to hang out in our backyards, especially if we have bird feeders or bird baths. And these are just a couple of the most common ones that you would find in our area. So up here, this one is a scrub jay. So it's part of the jay family, which means that they are very, very smart. They can also be kind of aggressive. So do watch out if you have these guys nesting in your yard anywhere, is sometimes they can be a little bit defensive of their nest. So if it's too close to your house, they might be swooping down, trying to warn you to stay away from the nest. And they will eat just about anything as well that they can find. They'll eat all different kinds of seeds. They're often bosses at bird feeders. They'll come in and kind of boss the other birds around. This one is a robin. So they are recognizable by that bright orange chest. You'll often see them on the ground running around in backyards looking for worms. They're a great backyard friend because they will be eating the insects out of your lawn. So hoping to keep your lawn nice and green. This one is called a Steller's jay in the bottom left-hand corner. I like to remember that their name is the Steller's jay because they have a super stellar haircut of that little mohawk. And they often get confused with blue jays. And while they are blue and they are a jay, it's a completely different species of bird. So these ones are the Steller's jays. We don't actually have blue jays on the West Coast. And like we've talked about, anytime you have prey, then you are bound to eventually attract a predator. So this bird right here is called a Cooper's hawk, and they like to hang out near bird feeders because they know it brings lots of smaller prey birds. So you might find them in neighborhoods as well. And I think this one is the last critter we are going to discuss tonight is our black bear. So if you live in Western Nevada or anywhere near Tahoe, it is possible to have a black bear as a backyard wildlife. So they are omnivores. So they'll, again, be eating just about anything they can find. They really like grasses, nuts, especially berries in the fall once they start to ripen up and get nice and sweet. They will also use those big old claws to rip into logs to eat insects. And again, those dead animals or carrion. But they're really not very good hunters either. So their adaptations, so you can see really well the claws in this photo. So those claws are really meant as tools for them, not at all as weapons. So they're not necessarily using those to be able to capture their food like a mountain lion would use its claws, but they're meant as tools. So they're used for digging, so digging out their hibernation den or digging up roots or digging into logs, or for climbing, because black bears, if they get scared, typically go up a tree. So they have those big claws for helping them to climb trees. They have an absolutely amazing sense of smell, like one of the best senses of smell in the whole entire animal kingdom. It's said that they can smell food from up to 10 miles away, which is pretty amazing. So they're often following that nose, and that is what gets them in trouble, is following that nose into somebody's backyard. Sometimes it's even things where there used to be food but isn't anymore, such as like a grill. If you made some yummy chicken for dinner, they will be following that nose. They can smell over 2,000 times better than a human, which is amazing. So they're really following that nose, and it leads them to food. And this especially can cause issues for bears during the fall when they're going through something called hyperphagia. So hyperphagia is when they are getting ready for hibernation. So hyperphagia just means, hyper means a lot and phagia means food. So it's just during this time of year, during the fall, when their whole purpose in life is to just eat a lot of food. So they will be following that nose and eating as much as they possibly can to get really fat in order to prepare for hibernation. So this is when we are more likely to encounter them in Western Nevada, is when they're going through hyperphagia, because they're going to be looking for food for like 20 hours a day. Sometimes they're basically on the hunt for food all of the time. So this is when we sometimes get them in our backyards, especially getting into those bird feeders. So during this time, and especially at night, because they're nocturnal, it's important that we should make sure that we don't have bird feeders out so that bears don't get into them. So these are what bear tracks look like. So they are going to have those 5 fingers again, and you can usually see those big old claw marks. And then they've got the longer back foot as well. This is what their tracks look like here in the mud. And for their scat, we will see if you can identify which one of these is the bear scat. So do you think A, B, or C is bear scat?
We've got a couple different answers. We've got 2 votes for B, 1 vote for C.
Split again?
Split
Well,
again.
This one was a trick question. All 3 are actually bear scat. So what's interesting about bears is they have such a huge variety of things that they will eat that their scat looks completely different based on what bear it is, what they happen to be eating, and the time of year. Initially, when bears come out of their hibernation dens in the spring, they are going to be eating a lot of like grasses and new growth and things that are also just popping up out of the ground. So there's going to be a lot more plant material, versus in the fall when the berries are ripened up and apple trees are ripe and things like that, then they're going to have a lot more of these berries and fruit in their scat. So it looks completely different. So this one was a trick question. All 3 are bear scat. So how can you see backyard wildlife? So we talked a little bit tonight about evidence of wildlife. So ways that we know animals were there even though we don't get to see them. So always, if you're in your own backyard or a neighborhood park, or you're going on a hike, I always suggest keeping an eye out for evidence of wildlife. So that can be things like the scat or tracks, or sometimes, you know, if they're walking through the trees, their fur might get snagged on a branch, so you can keep an eye out for fur, or feathers left behind from birds. There's lots of different evidence wildlife leaves behind. And you just gotta be patient. You know, go somewhere with animals and look, wait, and listen. So you can often hear them rustling. So if you're just like on a fast hike, you might miss them. But if you slow down and just listen and wait for a little bit, you might get to see some animals. And I love trail cameras. So we put in a couple of trail camera photos tonight. They are super fun, especially if you live in a place with lots of wildlife, to put them up and see what might be coming through at night when you're asleep and you never even had any idea. So thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in tonight and taking some time out of your evening to join us to learn a little bit about wildlife. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat box, or again, if you're on the Facebook Live, you can put them in the comment box, and we'll take a few minutes to answer any questions.
Yeah, so I have 2 that came in throughout your program. So we're gonna journey back a little bit. So the first one, we're gonna go back to the skunk. And the question was, does the skunk odor smell as bad to other animals as it does to us?
Yes, I don't know that it's quite as repulsive because humans really don't like it. But that is kind of its intent, is that other animals can smell it and will be deterred by that. So yeah, it is still an unpleasant smell for them. But I think it's probably worse for humans because we're not used to it.
Awesome, thank you. And then the other question that we're going to go back to is about the backyard birds. And the question was, will the bully bird go after the hawk?
Yes, absolutely. Oftentimes, if you ever see like a red-tailed hawk flying, then if you look closely, you might see some little birds that are actually, we call it mobbing. But yes, absolutely, the bully bird will chase off the hawk. And yeah, if they're getting too close to its nest or something, they are pretty social also, so they tend to hang out in groups. So a couple of them will chase off hawks and mob them and make sure that they stay away. So definitely.
Thank you. Yeah, we also had an awesome observation from someone's backyard. They said that they had a blue jay nest in, or a scrub jay nest, sorry, in their backyard. And it was not such good news for the robins. When the robins would try and eat the bugs in some of the apples on the grass, the scrub jays would dive down and attack them.
Yeah, they're kind of jerks, but they're effective. Yeah, that's very cool. That's fun to see.
Another question came in. Are the Stellar's jays the ones that make the squawking noise?
Oh yeah, I meant to mention that. That's a great question. Yes, they are very loud, both of the jays, the scrub jays and the stellar jays, but especially the Stellar's jays. They are very loud. They'll make squawking noises. They're also mimics, so they will try to mimic other animal noises, but especially hawks. They try to mimic red-tailed hawks so that they can sound tougher than they are and try to scare off any other animals. But if you're ever in an area that has a lot of them and you're like walking down the trail or something, they will all just kind of start squawking at you like an alarm, just letting the other ones know that there is danger in the area. Quite loud.
It's a very effective technique, I think.
It is.
All right, I'm not seeing any other questions pop in. So thank you so much, Jess. I really appreciated learning from you tonight.
Yes, thank you, Jess. Perfect. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. With that, Amanda, I will hand it back over to you if you wanted to add anything else.
Thank you so much, Jessica, and for everyone for joining us, for Endow, for coming in and doing this program for us. It was absolutely spectacular and I learned a lot. So thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us. We'll see you guys next time, either in the library where most branches are pretty much open now. So we'll either see you in the library or virtually. So have a great night, everyone. See you soon. Bye.